Welcome back to the Hidden Life of Trees, Chapter 5. It's a bit of a windy day today, so I hope you can hear me. I'll try and speak louder. The last chapter I read about the love between trees and flowering, blossoming, seeding, and I found it really fascinating to hear how oak and beech, they regulate their years of when they're all going to seed and bloom and when they're not going to, in a way that it helps to keep down the populations of creatures that eat their seeds. So some years there'll be a big harvest, and other years hardly anything, and that way that the populations of creatures that eat their seeds are kept regulated. I find it just so fascinating. Okay, this one's called the tree lottery. Trees maintain an inner balance. They budget their strength carefully, and they must be economical with energy so that they can meet all their needs. They expend some energy growing. They must lengthen their branches and widen the diameter of their trunks to support their increase in weight. They also hold some energy in reserves so that they can react immediately and activate defensive compounds in their leaves and bark if insects or fungi attack them. Finally, there is the question of propagation. Big rainbow. Propagation. Species that bloom every year plan for the Herculean task by carefully calibrating their energy levels. However, species that bloom only every 3 or 5 years, such as beeches and oaks, are thrown off kilter by such events. Most of their energy has already been earmarked for the other tasks, but they need to produce such enormous numbers of beech nuts and acorns that everything else must now take second place. The battle for the branches begins. There is not a speck of space for the blossoms, so a corresponding number of leaves must vacate their posts. In the years when the leaves shrivel and fall off, the trees look unusually bare, so it's no surprise that reports on the condition of forests where the affected trees are growing describe the tree canopy as being in a pitiful state. Because all the trees are going through this process at the same time. To a casual observer, the forest looks sick. The forest is not sick, but is vulnerable. The trees use the last of their energy reserves to produce the mass of blossoms, and to compound the problem, they are left with fewer leaves, so they produce less sugar than they normally do. Furthermore, most of the sugar they produce is converted into oil and starch in the seeds, so there is hardly any left over for the tree's daily needs and winter stores. To say nothing of the energy reserves intended to defend off against sickness. Many insects have been waiting for just this moment. For example, the beech leaf-eating mining weevil lays millions upon millions of eggs in the fresh defenseless foliage. Here the tiny larvae eat away flat tunnels between the top and bottom surfaces of the leaves, leaving brown papery trails as they feed. The adult beetles chew holes in the leaves until they look as though a hunter had blasted them with a shotgun. Some years when the infestations are so severe that from afar the beeches look more brown than green. Normally the trees would fight back by making the insect's meal extremely bitter, literally. But after producing all those blossoms, they are out of steam, and so this season they must endure the attack without responding. Healthy trees get over this, especially because afterwards there will be a number of years for them to recover. However, if a beech tree is already sickly before the attack, then such an infestation can sound its death knell. Even if the tree knew this, it would not produce fewer blossoms. We know from the times of high forest mortality that it is usually the particularly battered individuals that burst into bloom. If they die, their genetic legacy might disappear, and so they probably want to reproduce right away to make sure it continues. Something similar happens after unusually hot summers. After extreme droughts brings many trees to the brink of death, they all bloom together the following year, which goes to show that large quantities of beech nuts and acorns don't indicate that the next winter will be particularly harsh. As blossoms are set the summer before, the abundance of fruit reflects what happened the previous year and has nothing to do with what will happen in the future. The effect of weak defences shows up again in the fall, this time in the seeds. The beech leaf miners bore into the fruit buds as well as the leaves. Subsequently, although beech nuts form, they remain empty and therefore are barren and worthless. When a seed falls from a tree, the light's not very good. When a seed falls from a tree, each species has its own strategy as to when the seed sprouts. So how does that work? If a seed lands on a soft, damp soil, it has no choice but to sprout as soon as it is warmed by the sun in the spring. For every day the embryonic tree lies around on the ground unprotected, it is in great danger come spring. Wild boar and deer are always hungry, and this is just what the large seeds of species such as beeches and oaks do. The next generation emerges from beech nuts and acorns as quickly as it can, so that it can be less attractive to herbivores. And because this is their one and only plan, the seeds don't have long-term defense strategies against fungi and bacteria. The seeds slough off their protective casing, which lie around the forest floor through the summer and rot away by the following spring. Many other species, however, give their seeds the opportunity to wait one or more years until they start to grow. Of course, this means a higher risk of being eaten, but it also offers substantial advantages. For example, seedlings can die of thirst in a dry spring, and when that happens, all the energy put into the next generation is wasted. Or when a deer has its territory and main feeding ground in exactly the spot where the seed lands, it takes no more than a few days for the seedling's tasty new leaves to end up in the deer's stomach. In contrast, if some of the seeds do not germinate for a year or more, then the risk is spread out so that at least a few little trees are likely to make it. Bird cherries adopt this strategy. Their seeds can lie dormant for up to 5 years, waiting for the right time to sprout. This is a good strategy for the typical pioneer species. Beech nuts and acorns always fall under their mother tree, so the seedlings grow in a predictable, pleasant forest microclimate. But little bird cherries can end up anywhere. Birds that gobble the tart fruit make random deposits of seeds wrapped in their own little packages of fertilizers. If a package lands out in the open in a year when the weather is extreme, temperatures will be hotter and water supply scarcer than in the cool, damp shadows of a mature forest. Then it's an advantage if at least one of the stowaways wait a few years before waking to their new life. And after they wake, what are the youngsters' chances of growing up and producing another generation? That's a relatively easy calculation to make. Statistically speaking, each tree raises exactly one adult offspring to take its place. Wow, with all them seeds, only one adult offspring. to take its place. For those that don't make it, seeds may germinate and young seedlings may vegetate for a few years or even a few decades in the shadows, but sooner or later they run out of steam. They are not alone. Dozens of offspring from other years also stand at their mother's feet, and by most give up and return to humus. Eventually, a few of the lucky ones that have been carried to open spaces on the forest floor by the wind or by animals get a good start in life and grow to adulthood. Back to the odds. Every 5 years, a beech tree produces at least 30,000 beech nuts. Thanks to climate change, it now does it as often as every 2 or 3 years, but we'll put that aside for the moment. It is sexually mature at about 80 to 150 years of age, depending on how much light it gets, where it's growing. Assuming it grows to be 400 years old, it can fruit at least 60 times and produce a total of 1.8 million beech nuts. Oh my God. From these, exactly one will develop into a full tree, and in forest terms, that is a high rate of success. Something seems very strange with that. Similar to winning the lottery. All the other hopeful embryos are either eaten by animals or broken down into humus by fungi or bacteria. Using the same formula, let's calculate the odds that await tree offsprings in the least favourable circumstances. Let's consider the poplar. The mother trees each produce up to 54 million seeds every year. How their little ones would love to change places with the beech tree youngsters. Until the old ones hand over the reins to the next generation, they produce more than 1 billion seeds wrapped in their fluffy packages. These seeds strike out via airmail in search of new pastures. But even for them, based purely on statistics, there can only be one winner. Wow, it's very hard to imagine. It's extreme, isn't it? How many seeds and how many actually grow into full, healthy trees. I wonder if that's in these present times, whether it's more like that or whether that's just the way it's been for a long time. It's fascinating. Hope you enjoyed. Yeah, take care. Bye for now.